It was, as Lord Peter Wimsey often remarked on occasions less fraught with murder and mayhem, a truth universally acknowledged that footmen detest their shoes. This observation, entirely without prejudice and founded on an extensive catalogue of personal experience, seemed on that particular misty autumn morning rather less trivial than usual. For the discontent of one Archibald Rudge, footman extraordinaire at the gloomy if genteel estate of Bleakhurst Manor, was about to embroil his lordship in an affair of no small peculiarity and more than a touch of the grotesque. The morning had begun with an uncharacteristic gloom, a fog so thick it might have been spun from the very depths of a Gothic novel. Wimsey, on an enforced holiday that was proving neither restful nor dull, had chanced upon Bleakhurst whilst en route to an inconsequential luncheon engagement. The manor's tall chimneys pierced the fog like sentinel daggers, and the gardens were sodden with a melancholic drizzle. The first thing to greet him was the sound of raised voices, distinctly unrefined and certainly unladylike, echoing from the servants' quarters. Intrigued, or as he put it, intellectually piqued, Wimsey approached the side entrance, whereupon he found, to his mild surprise, a half-naked Archibald Rudge engaged in what could only be described as an impassioned protest against the tyranny of his footwear. "My lord," the footman said, glancing up with a mixture of desperation and dignified wrath, "it is the shoes, sir. The cursed, clumsy, blundering things. I do swear if they were made of lead I should be less burdened by their weight and more free to dance a jig upon the parlour floor." Wimsey could not help but notice the absurdity of a grown man making a grievance of his shoes as though they were some infernal device of torture rather than mere leather and laces. He raised an eyebrow, and adopting a tone of scholarly reproach, said, "Mr. Rudge, if I may be so bold, shoes are designed for the very purpose of enabling locomotion. One might suggest your discontent is more a matter of temperament than of toe-pinching." The footman huffed, his crimson cheeks matching the autumnal leaves outside. "Temperament, my lord? I am a man of even temperament, save for these infernal contraptions. But enough of my lamentations. Something far graver has occurred." At this moment, the butler, a grim man of rigid habits named Mr. Clive, emerged from the shadows of the kitchen doorway, his expression as stern and as impenetrable as a stone gargoyle. "His lordship, there's been an incident in the drawing room. Lady Bleakhurst found her husband, well, in a most unfortunate state." Wimsey's interest sharpened. "Unfortunate, you say? Do enlighten me, Clive. And do be precise. We must not sully the reputation of the deceased with vague insinuations." Butler's lips pressed thin. "Lord Bleakhurst has been discovered lying across the Persian rug, a letter opener protruding from his chest." Wimsey surveyed the scene as he was led inside, a study of calm disorder. Books strewn, a faint scent of lavender mingled with the metallic tang of blood, and a window slightly ajar, allowing the early chill to creep inside. He noted the misaligned clock on the mantelpiece, ticking stubbornly 5 minutes behind the wall clock, an incongruity that he felt might bear significance or might simply be the domestic equivalent of a sneeze. He allowed himself a thin smile, half sardonic, half intrigued. "A letter opener, you say? Quite the quaint choice of weapon, and not a particularly silent one, I imagine. The game, as the saying goes, is afoot, although one might argue rather clumsily given the choice of weapon and the presence of an open window." Clive shot him a look that brooked no nonsense. "Murder is never clumsy, my lord, only desperate." Wimsey flicked ash from his cigar, his eyes glinting. "Indeed, Clive, and desperation, as we shall see, often leaves the faintest and most curious of traces." Thus began the curious case of the footman who hated shoes, and the murder that promised to unravel the quiet veneer of Bleakhurst Manor, exposing secrets that no amount of polished silver or perfumed handkerchiefs could hope to conceal. Whimsy folded the note with a care that suggested reverence rather than mere preservation of evidence. The ink blot, far from obscuring the message, seemed to stain it with a silent urgency. He handed it back to Clive, who tucked it into a folder with an efficiency born of long habit. "Curious," Whimsy murmured, pacing the length of the library with his hands clasped behind his back. "Threats, warnings, a little theatrical but nonetheless suggestive of deeper currents at play. Mr. Rudge, you overheard this exchange last night, did you say?" "Near the library door, sir, but not close enough to catch the other voice." "Clearly. Do you recall the visitor's appearance or any distinguishing features?" The footman hesitated, brow furrowing. "I only glimpsed a shadow in the dim light. He, or she, was dressed in dark clothes, perhaps a coat with a high collar. It was too indistinct to say more." "A shadow in dark clothes," Whimsy repeated, his voice lightly mocking. "The perfect character for a Gothic novel, though less so for a gentleman's country house. Still, such details matter little unless supported by something more concrete." He turned his attention to the desk, noting the scattered papers, some with smudged ink, others torn at the edges as if hastily handled. "Did Lord Bleakhurst have many visitors, Clive? Or was this an unusual occurrence?" "The visits were few and far between. Lord Bleakhurst was known to prefer solitude in his final years, though he maintained correspondence with several acquaintances in London. The last visitor before this was the one Lady Bleakhurst mentioned, a Mr. Henry Grantham, a solicitor, from the city." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "A solicitor, always a promising figure in such dramas. Do we know the purpose of his visit?" Lady Bleakhurst stated it concerned matters of the estate, but specifics were not given. "Estate matters, naturally," Whimsy said with a faint smile. "Where there is property, there is always intrigue, and often resentment." He moved toward the window once more, pulling the curtain aside to peer out into the fog-shrouded gardens. The mist clung to the hedges and statues like a secretive whisper, masking shapes and possibilities. "I would wager," Whimsy mused, "that the quarrel overheard by Mr. Rudge had more to do with the contents of that letter we cannot yet see than with any trivial domestic dispute." "May I ask, my lord," Clive interrupted, "what line of inquiry you intend to pursue?" Whimsy regarded the butler thoughtfully. "First, a careful reconstruction of events. The timeline is our foundation. We know Lady Bleakhurst found her husband soon after morning prayers, presumably around 10 o'clock. The mantel clock shows 5 minutes slow, and the hall clock struck twice instead of 4. Such details, Mr. Rudge, you will do well to recall. Footman nodded, looking a shade less troubled by his footwear for the moment. "Clive, I would request a list of all household members present this morning, including any visitors or guests. I shall speak with each in turn." "Very good, my lord. The housekeeper and the cook have been in the kitchen since before dawn. The gardener was seen entering the grounds early. The maidservants began their duties shortly after 6. Whimsy smiled thinly. "A well-oiled machine, this Bleakhurst household. Let us see whether the oil is genuine or merely a veneer." As the butler moved away to gather his notes, Whimsy paused by the library door and called back to Archibald. "Rudge. Mr. Rudge, your complaint about your shoes was, as I suggested, an astute observation. Tell me, when did you remove or loosen them this morning?" "In the servants' hall, just before breakfast," Rudge replied. "I confess I had hoped to avoid the discomfort. The new shoes are particularly stiff." "And where were you?" "Immediately thereafter. Checking the kitchen pantry, my lord, to confirm the stock for the coming week. It is part of my duties, though I do not fancy it." "An admirable diligence," Whimsy said dryly. "Did you observe anything unusual in the pantry? Any signs of disturbance?" "No, my lord. Everything was in order, though I did notice the back door was left ajar." "Left ajar?" Whimsy's interest sharpened. "Unusual, given the precise nature of a country house's routines." "It was not open wide, my lord, but enough to let in a draught." I closed it before proceeding. Thank you, Mr. Rudge. You may remain close by. I may have further questions. Left alone for a moment, Whimsy lit his cigar and contemplated the room. His gaze drifted to a series of portraits lining the walls. Ancestors of the Bleakhurst line, stiff in their embroidered coats and powdered wigs. Their painted eyes seemed to mock the present, silent witnesses to the unravelling of family secrets. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and began sketching a rough timeline. A.M. Servants begin their duties. 30 A.M. Lady Bleakhurst retires to her morning prayers. A.M. Footman Rudge loosens shoes. 45 A.M. Visitor arrives, likely Mr. Grantham. 10 a.m. Morning prayers end. Tea is expected shortly. 10:05 a.m. Lady Bleakhurst discovers Lord Bleakhurst's body. The 5-minute discrepancy of the mantel clock, the halved toll of the hall clock, and the open back door all unsettled the tidy order of events. Whimsy was convinced these were not random faults or lapses, but deliberate manipulations designed to cloud the facts. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. The housekeeper entered, a woman with a composed face and eyes sharp as a hawk's. "My lord," she said, "if I may, Lady Bleakhurst wishes to speak with you. She is in the drawing-room and awaits your presence." "Very well, Whimsy," replied, stubbing out his cigar. "Lead the way." Lady Bleakhurst was seated with remarkable composure for a woman who had just found her husband murdered. Her dress was impeccable, a black silk gown that emphasized the regal curve of her neck. Yet her eyes betrayed fatigue and something deeper, a flicker of anxiety that no amount of practiced poise could conceal. "My lord," she said, rising as Whimsy approached, "thank you for coming so promptly. I fear the shock has not dulled the urgency of understanding what happened here." "Indeed, Lady Bleakhurst, the urgency is matched only by the need for accuracy. May I ask, did your husband have any enemies? Any recent disputes or concerns?" She hesitated. "Not enemies, no, but there have been troubles, financial troubles mostly. The estate is burdened with debts that we have struggled to manage." "A common plight, I'm afraid," Whimsy said sympathetically. "And the letter you mentioned earlier, might it pertain to these financial matters?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. It was from one of his creditors, I believe, but the tone was more threatening than businesslike. It suggested that if we did not come to terms, there would be consequences. Consequences that might include murder, perhaps." Whimsy's tone was gentle but incisive. She flinched, then steadied herself. "I cannot say. Archibald was not a man to be easily intimidated. But last night he was disturbed, and he spoke of past debts and old grievances, things from his youth that he had hoped were long buried. A past that refuses to stay buried," Whimsy mused. "And do you recall if he mentioned anyone by name?" "Only vaguely. He spoke of a man named Garrett, someone from his childhood. He said Garrett was a shadow that had followed him all these years." "Garrett," Whimsy repeated thoughtfully. "A name worth remembering." She looked at him, a flicker of hope mingling with her grief. "Can you find out who did this, my lord? For all our sakes?" Whimsy inclined his head with a grave solemnity. "That, Lady Bleakhurst, is precisely why I am here." As she left to compose herself, Whimsy's mind churned. Garrett was a thread he had not yet encountered, but one that might well unravel the tangled skein of motives and means. He returned to the library, where Clive was waiting with the household list. Whimsy scanned it quickly. Names of servants, tenants, local tradespeople. Nothing seemed out of place, though the presence of a gardener named Thomas Marsh caught his eye. "Clive, I shall wish to speak with Mr. Marsh at once," Whimsy said. The butler inclined his head. "I will fetch him immediately." As the fog thickened outside, cloaking Bleakhurst Manor in a veil of secrecy, Whimsy's investigation was gathering pace. The clockwork of motive and opportunity was intricate, and the human heart, as ever, a labyrinth of contradictions. One thing was certain: the man who hated shoes had unwittingly stepped into a far darker dance, and Lord Peter Wimsey was determined to lead. Thomas Marsh entered the library with a hesitant step, his hands clasped nervously before him. The gardener was a man of middling height, sun-darkened and weathered, his eyes quick to dart away when Wimsey's gaze settled upon him with that peculiar mixture of benign curiosity and sharp scrutiny. "Mr. Marsh, I understand you were tending the grounds early this morning," Wimsey began, "a task requiring an intimate knowledge of the estate's comings and goings. Perhaps you noticed something unusual as the day began." Marsh swallowed, clearing his throat. "No, sir. Nothing out of the ordinary. The morning was foggy, as you can see outside. I was pruning the box hedges near the east wing. I didn't see any visitors before Mr. Grantham arrived." "And what of last evening, Mr. Marsh? Did you hear anything unusual after dusk?" The gardener frowned, scratching at a stubbly chin. "Well, now you mention it, I did hear raised voices sometime after 9. It was muffled, like through a closed window, but there was anger, definitely." "From which direction?" "From the library wing, sir. That's where Lord Bleakhurst spends most evenings." Wimsey nodded, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "Did you happen to see who was speaking with Lord Bleakhurst at that hour?" "No, sir. The windows were shuttered tight, and I was too far away to make out faces." "Very well, Mr. Marsh. Thank you for your candour." As Marsh left, Wimsey turned to Clive. "A quarrel behind shuttered windows. That aligns well with Mr. Rudge's note of overheard anger near the library door." Clive nodded. "Indeed, my lord. The housekeeper mentioned that the shutters had been closed after dusk, for privacy, as Lord Bleakhurst disliked prying eyes." Wimsey steepled his fingers, eyes narrowing. "Privacy is the refuge of both the innocent and the guilty." He moved toward the window, where the thick fog continued to swirl, blurring the edges of reality. Clocks, doors, shutters, all instruments of control or concealment. But what of the letter, Lady Bleakhurst's ominous correspondence? Clive produced the letter from the folder. Wimsey took it and read aloud in his precise, clipped manner. "Failing settlement, we shall be compelled to take drastic measures to recover our due." Stark phrasing, yet deliberately vague. No name, no specific threat, merely the promise of ruin. He folded the letter carefully. Financial ruin is a common motive, but the choice of words here suggests a personal vendetta. Drastic measures is not the language of a polite solicitor, but of someone with an axe to grind. "Lady Bleakhurst mentioned a man named Garrett," Clive added. "Someone from Lord Bleakhurst's youth. Might he be connected to this letter?" "Quite likely." Wimsey's eyes gleamed with sudden insight. "It would seem that Mr. Garrett is the spectre haunting the Bleakhurst estate. I shall require a list of all past acquaintances of Lord Bleakhurst, especially those named Garrett." Clive hesitated. "That might be difficult, my lord. Lord Bleakhurst was not given to boasting about his past, and few in the village knew much." "Then we shall have to dig a little deeper." As Clive departed, Wimsey's thoughts returned to the subtle inconsistencies in the timeline. The mantel clock's 5-minute delay, the hall clock's 2 strikes instead of 4, such minutiae seemed petty, yet they clearly held meaning. He made his way to the hall, examining the clocks with the practiced eye of a man who found truth in mechanical precision. The mantel clock was evidently set slow, and the hall clock deliberately silenced for half its toll. Why engineer such confusion? To create alibis, to mislead witnesses, or simply to unnerve those who rely on timekeeping? From the hall, Wimsey moved toward the servants' quarters, seeking Archibald Rudge once more. The footman was adjusting a portrait's frame with unusual care, his bare feet silent on the polished floor. Mr. Rudge, Whimsy began gently, tell me about the back door you found ajar. Is it commonly left so? Never, my lord. It is one of the strictest rules in the household to keep all doors secured, especially at night. Was there any sign of forced entry? No, my lord. It seemed to have been left unlatched rather than broken. An invitation? Or a careless oversight? Rudge's gaze faltered. I don't know, sir. Whimsy's smile was thin, almost imperceptible. Neither do I, but I suspect it is more significant than mere accident. He paused, glancing at the footman's bare feet. And these shoes, do you dislike them so much that you would risk comfort over protocol? Rudge flushed but remained silent. Whimsy chuckled softly. No matter. Small discomforts may lead to great discoveries. Back in the drawing room, Whimsy resumed his seat as Lady Bleakhurst re-entered, her composure restored to a semblance of calm. My lord, she said, there is something else you should know. Lord Bleakhurst had a habit, peculiar perhaps, of locking one drawer in his desk each evening. He never explained why, but it was as if a secret lay buried within. Have you seen this drawer, madam? Yes, but it was locked this morning. I do not have the key. Whimsy's curiosity sharpened. Might I examine the desk? Lady Bleakhurst led him to the study, where the desk stood like a silent sentinel. Whimsy knelt, testing the drawer. The lock was indeed sturdy. Is the key elsewhere in the house? He asked. I'm afraid not, my lord. Only Lord Bleakhurst had it. Whimsy examined the drawer's edges and the surrounding woodwork. No sign of tampering, but it is possible to pick such a lock if one is skilled. The question is, has it been opened recently? He looked up. Lady Bleakhurst, might there be another key, perhaps held by a trusted servant? She shook her head. No, my lord. Only the master of the house. Then I shall have to inquire further. Secrets, madam, are the currency of the dead as well as the living. That evening, Whimsy insisted on examining the library in detail. He measured distances, tested acoustics, and inspected the shutters, their hinges creaking faintly. A faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, oddly out of place amid the dusty volumes and heavy furniture. He noted the precise alignment of furniture, the position of the armchair near the fireplace, and a silver salver left conspicuously on a side table. The salver bore a small scratch, as if dragged or caught on fabric. He called in Clive. Has anyone noticed this salver before today? Clive shook his head. Not particularly, my lord. It is often used for afternoon tea. Whimsy examined the scratches more closely. Curious. The mark suggests it was moved in haste or with some force. He knelt to inspect the carpet beneath. And this indentation, recently made, I presume? Yes, my lord. Whimsy straightened, a faint smile playing on his lips. A room arranged, meticulously, yet betraying signs of disturbance. The devil is in the details, as ever. Later he summoned Archibald Rudge once more. Mr. Rudge, I understand you deliver the Morning Post. Could you recount your route this morning, and any anomalies you may have observed? Rudge nodded. I collect letters from the postbox near the front gates, sir, then deliver them to the housekeeper. And the route? I walked through the garden path, past the east wing windows, and then entered the servants' hall. Did you encounter anyone along the way? No, sir. The house was quiet. Quiet, except for the occasional footsteps or voices. Only the gardener, sir, as I passed. Whimsy's eyes twinkled. Your route, timing, and observations will prove most useful, I think. He dismissed the footman, then sank into the armchair, fingers steepled once more. The puzzle was taking shape. A secret drawer, an enigmatic visitor, muffled voices, a deliberately altered chronology, and the spectre of an old acquaintance named Garrett. Yet the final piece remained, elusive. Whimsy's mind ticked over the minutiae, the clocks, the doors, the scratches. It was a game of shadows, where each step illuminated a new facet of human frailty. Outside, the fog thickened, wrapping Bleakhurst Manor in a shroud of ambiguity. Inside, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared to peel back the layers, one meticulous clue at a time. Thank you for clarifying. I'll continue with approximately 1 to 200 words for the next section, maintaining the style, tone, and logical flow. Here we go. Wimsey's thoughts, like the creeping fog outside, thickened around the mysteries of Bleakhurst Manor. The locked drawer, the altered clocks, the muffled voices, each was a thread that, when tugged properly, promised to unravel the tangled skein of events that had led to Lord Bleakhurst's untimely demise. The following morning, Wimsey requested to speak once more with the household staff. The routine inquiries of a detective were, for those involved, tedious and oftentimes irksome. But Wimsey's inquiries bore the curious mark of intellectual theatre, performed with the lightness of a courtier and the precision of a surgeon. He began again with the housekeeper, Mrs. Havisham, a woman whose severe features seemed carved from granite, and whose eyes held the weary resignation of one who had long witnessed human folly behind closed doors. Mrs. Havisham, Wimsey said, settling into his chair in the servants' hall. I am most intrigued by the matter of this locked drawer. Could you tell me if anyone, besides Lord Bleakhurst, had any reason or occasion to seek access to his study, perhaps under cover of darkness or during unusual hours? Mrs. Havisham adjusted her cap and answered with the clipped precision of one guarding both fact and reputation. No one, sir. The study was Lord Bleakhurst's sanctum. Only he and Lady Bleakhurst had keys. Servants were strictly forbidden entry unless instructed. Indeed, Wimsey murmured, and yet the door was found ajar, was it not? Only the back door, sir. That leads to the garden. Curious, said Wimsey. And the shutters of the library, were they closed or open when you last attended? Shut tight after dusk, as ordered. Lord Bleakhurst was very private. And the voices the gardener heard? Likely Lord Bleakhurst and a visitor, sir, but none can say who. Wimsey gave a thin smile. The plot thickens like a well-stirred custard, Mrs. Havisham. I thank you. Next came the cook, a brisk woman named Mrs. Pritchard, whose quick temper and sharper tongue made her both feared and indispensable. Mrs. Pritchard, Wimsey began, might I trouble you for the household schedule on the night in question? When were the servants off duty, and what of their movements? Cook's orders, sir, are to be obeyed strictly. Servants retire at 10 unless otherwise instructed. I saw nothing unusual that night, save that Archibald the footman seemed restless, fidgeting about without his shoes. Ah, the shoes again, Wimsey murmured. Did he complain of discomfort or show signs of haste or worry? Mrs. Pritchard chuckled. Wears those new boots like they're shackles, sir. Always preferring to go barefoot in the house. A matter of habit, perhaps, or rebellion. She shook her head, dismissing the notion. Nonsense, sir. Footmen are footmen. Wimsey made a mental note. Habits, even trivial ones, often hold keys to character. The gardener, Marsh, was next, summoned again to clarify his testimony. Wimsey was particularly interested in the timing of the voices heard. Mr. Marsh, you placed the quarrel sometime after 9. Can you be more precise? The gardener hesitated. Closer to 9:30, sir, but the fog muffled the sounds. And the voices, was it more than one? Yes, sir, I heard 2 distinct tones, one angry, one pleading. Any words? Only fragments. Not my fault. And something like, you'll regret this. Wimsey's lips twitched. Dramatic phrases, no doubt. Tell. Me, Mr. Marsh, did you hear the front door or any other doors open or close around that time? No, sir. All was still save for the voices. Wimsey considered this. The back door ajar, voices behind closed shutters, and no recorded ingress or egress pointed toward a clandestine meeting rather than a violent entry. turning his attention to the footman. Whimsy pressed again on Rudge's peculiar footwear habits. "Mr. Rudge, does your preference for bare feet ever interfere with your duties?" "Not as such, my lord. It's just more comfortable indoors." "Comfort, yes, but it seems to have made you careless once or twice. The back door left unlatched, for example." Rudge looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know how that happened, sir." "Carelessness, or something else? I truly don't know, my lord." Whimsy allowed the silence to linger before shifting to another line of inquiry. "I have a query about your movements that evening. You mentioned collecting the post at dawn. Were you alone?" "Yes, sir." "The house was quiet. Did you observe anything unusual along your path?" "No, only the usual. Fog, silence, and the occasional garden flower." "Very well. I thank you, Mr. Rudge." As the morning waned, Whimsy retired to the study to pore over the correspondence Lady Bleakhurst had provided. His eyes lingered over the letter from the mysterious Garrett. The letter's edges were worn, its ink faded, but the threat remained stark. He leaned back, fingers steepled, mind racing through the possibilities. Garrett was no mere creditor, but an avenger or a scoundrel seeking retribution for a long-buried grievance. The motive extended beyond money. It struck at the very heart of Lord Bleakhurst's concealed past. Whimsy's gaze fell upon a photograph on the mantel. A younger Lord Bleakhurst alongside a man with a scowl that bespoke more than mere acquaintance. The same man, he surmised, was Garrett. There was a psychological tension here, an unspoken enmity that history had failed to resolve. As afternoon shadows lengthened, a new development arrived in the form of a telegram delivered by a breathless messenger, a summons for Lady Bleakhurst to attend to urgent business in London, effectively removing her from the manor for the evening. This sudden departure struck Whimsy as convenient, perhaps too convenient, but he withheld comment. The stage was set for the next act, the house quieter now, with its secrets more densely packed. Whimsy spent the hours reconstructing the timeline with meticulous care. The clocks, previously misaligned, were reset to their proper times, the muffled voices aligned with the gardener's testimony, the back door's position re-examined with a new suspicion. The locked drawer remained the keystone mystery. Whimsy was determined to find a way inside, convinced that it held the truth. That night, as the household settled into uneasy rest, Whimsy positioned himself near the library, watching the windows and shutters, noting any movement or sound. The fog pressed against the panes like a ghostly hand. The silence was broken only by the faint ticking of clocks, each telling its own tale of time, deception, and mortality. And somewhere beyond those walls, the answer waited patiently, cloaked, in shadow, and waiting to be revealed. Whimsy's vigil by the library window was rewarded with little more than the steady tick-tock of the clocks and the occasional whisper of wind threading its way through the manor's creaking eaves. Yet even in that quiet, the house seemed alive with undercurrents. Subtle shifts in air and silence, the faintest impressions of human presence slipping just beyond the edge of perception. The next morning he was roused by a sharp rap on his door. Clive entered, looking unusually serious. "My lord, there is something you must see in the servants' hall. It concerns Mr. Rudge." Whimsy dressed quickly and followed. In the hall, Mrs. Havisham stood rigid beside Archibald Rudge, whose usual composure had given way to visible agitation. "He's been found in a state of distress, my lord," the housekeeper explained. "Claimed to have seen something, or someone, last night near the East Wing garden." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "Do go on, Mr. Rudge." The footman swallowed hard. I couldn't sleep, sir. I took a walk to clear my head. Near the East Wing. I thought I saw a figure slipping through the fog, moving quickly towards the back door. I called out, but it vanished before I could make it out clearly. A mysterious visitor in the fog. How very theatrical, Wimsey mused. Did you recognize the figure, Mr. Rudge? No, my lord. Too shadowed by the mist. Wimsey studied him carefully. And your bare feet, Mr. Rudge, were they not vulnerable to the chill of night and the rough garden paths? Rudge looked down, but something in his eyes had shifted. Fear, or perhaps guilt. I had no choice, sir. Very well. You say the figure moved towards the back door. Was it open or closed when you arrived? Open, my lord, just as I found it earlier. Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. This corroborates the earlier observation. An unauthorized entry or exit, then. The question remains, who and why? He dismissed Rudge and summoned Clive. Prepare the servants' quarters for a thorough search. Every inch of the east wing garden and adjoining areas must be scoured. For footprints, disturbances, anything that might give us a clue. Clive saluted and set about the task. Meanwhile, Wimsey returned to the study, where the locked drawer continued to beckon. The thought occurred to him that perhaps the key, or a means to open it, might not lie with the obvious suspects. He recalled Lady Bleakhurst's earlier claim that only her husband possessed the key, yet secrets often have a way of spilling through cracks in the most secure locks. An idea struck him. He fetched the desk chair and examined it closely. Underneath, hidden cleverly but not expertly, was a small latch, likely a catch for a secret compartment. It was a classic device, something a man with Lord Bleakhurst's penchant for privacy might employ. Using a small penknife borrowed from the dining room, Wimsey worked delicately at the latch. With a soft click, a hidden panel slid aside, revealing a narrow compartment within the desk. Inside lay a small bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. He untied it carefully, revealing letters, faded photographs, and a folded document bearing a seal he did not recognize immediately. The letters were old, written in a cramped hand and dated back over a decade. As Wimsey skimmed through, he uncovered references to debts, threats, and a desperate plea from someone named Garrett, a man clearly seeking restitution or revenge for an injustice suffered years earlier. One letter mentioned a final meeting, and a promise to expose a betrayal that must never see the light of day. Wimsey's lips curled in a faint, wry smile. The past, it seemed, had not only been buried, but was now clawing its way back, hungry and unforgiving. He turned his attention to the sealed document. Breaking the seal carefully, he discovered a will, not Lord Bleakhurst's current will, but an older version favouring a beneficiary who had since vanished from the record, a woman named Helena Garrett. Wimsey leaned back, considering. If this Helena Garrett was the Garrett in question, her disappearance, and the threat posed by her kin, could well be the true source of animosity. Just then Clive reappeared. My lord, the search has yielded something curious. Footprints, small barefoot impressions, leading from the east wing garden back towards the servants' quarters. They appear fresh, as if made last night. Barefoot, you say? Mr. Rudge's territory, perhaps? Wimsey raised a speculative eyebrow. Indeed. There was also a torn scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush near the path. It matches the material of one of the housekeeper's aprons. An interesting detail, Wimsey murmured. It suggests either a struggle or hurried movement involving a servant, and the open back door may be more than a careless mistake. He gestured to Clive. Gather Mrs. Havisham and Mrs. Pritchard. We shall require explanations for this scrap and any unusual activity last night. Within minutes, the two formidable women stood before Wimsey, expression guarded. I understand, Wimsey began calmly, that a piece of fabric belonging to one of you was found in the east garden. Both women exchanged glances. Mrs. Havisham spoke first. My lord, I can only say that the apron is old and often repaired. I cannot imagine how a piece could have torn off unnoticed. Mrs. Pritchard added defensively, servants often work late or rise early. Accidents happen. Quite so, Wimsey agreed. But did either of you leave the kitchen or servants' hall after hours last night? Mrs. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. No, sir. Mrs. Havisham hesitated. Neither did I, my lord. I was in my quarters by 10. Wimsey considered their answers. Very well, I shall verify. He dismissed them with a polite nod and turned to Clive. Arrange for a discreet inquiry into their whereabouts last night, including interviews with other staff. Meanwhile, I intend to examine the torn fabric and see if it can be linked to any particular garment. The day wore on with slow, deliberate investigation. Wimsey found himself reflecting on the psychological dimension of the crime. The victim's secret past, the ghosts of old debts and old wounds, the deliberate tampering with time and space within the manor, all pointed to a perpetrator driven by more than mere greed. There was a desire to control the narrative, to manipulate perception, and above all, to conceal a truth that would devastate reputations. By late afternoon, Clive returned with an update. My lord, the staff have reported that Mr. Rudge was seen loitering near the East Wing garden shortly before midnight. He appeared nervous, glancing frequently over his shoulder. Wimsey's smile was faintly amused. Our barefoot footman, then, is more involved than he cares to admit. Furthermore, Clive continued, Mrs. Havisham was heard reprimanding him shortly after midnight. The tone was sharp, suggesting a secret being enforced. Wimsey nodded. The web tightens. He made his way to the servants' quarters, where Rudge was awaiting him, face pale but defiant. Mr. Rudge, Wimsey began, your nocturnal wanderings and the evidence of the torn apron demand explanation. Care to enlighten me? The footman swallowed and looked away. I feared something was amiss, my lord. I wanted to see if anyone was coming to harm the household. And did you find what you sought? Rudge's voice was barely a whisper. No, but I did find a message. A note slipped under the back door. Wimsey's interest piqued. A note? Rudge nodded and retrieved a small, crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. Wimsey smoothed it out carefully and read, Trust no one. The past is not dead. The cryptic message sent a shiver through the room. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. Clearly, someone wishes to unsettle the household, to play on fears and secrets. But to what end? Rudge hesitated, then said, I believe the answer lies with Lady Bleakhurst. She has been anxious since receiving the telegram, and there are whispers among the staff of a hidden dispute between her and Lord Bleakhurst. Wimsey folded the note and nodded slowly. The tangled threads begin to converge. The next step is to confront Lady Bleakhurst. Delicately, of course. As evening fell over Bleakhurst Manor, the flickering candlelight cast long shadows upon the walls. Lord Peter Wimsey prepared for what promised to be a conversation laden with unspoken truths and carefully guarded revelations. The game was far from over, but the pieces were moving inexorably toward their appointed places. Lady Bleakhurst received Lord Peter Wimsey in the drawing-room with the impeccable politeness expected of one so steeped in the social graces of the English upper class, but there was an undeniable tension beneath her composed exterior. The faint scent of bergamot hung in the air, mingling oddly with the ever-present underlying smell of damp wood and cold stone that seemed to permeate the manor. Wimsey noted it with a mental quip, a subtle reminder that the past never quite dries out. She sat with her hands clasped neatly in her lap, eyes bright but watchful. Lord Peter, I am most grateful for your involvement. This dreadful business has unsettled us all. Her voice was soft, but it carried an edge of steel beneath the veneer of genteel distress. Wimsey inclined his head slightly. My lady, The unpleasantness of murder is the unfortunate price of intrigue in any house with as many secrets as Bleakhurst. May I be so bold as to inquire into the nature of the hidden dispute Mr. Rudge alluded to? Lady Bleakhurst's lips twitched, as if fighting a smile or a sob. It is a matter best kept private, my lord. My husband and I have had disagreements, as all married couples do, but nothing that would lead to such tragic consequences. Of course, my lady, Wimsey replied smoothly. Yet I find it curious that you mentioned the telegram. I see it. She hesitated, then, with a slight sigh, retrieved a delicate envelope from her handbag. The telegram inside was terse, bearing a single line. The past is coming back. Beware. It was unsigned, the sender a mystery as shadowy as the message itself. A most theatrical warning, Wimsey commented dryly. Did you recognize the handwriting or the postmark? Lady Bleakhurst shook her head. No, it was delivered by hand last evening, with great caution. An anonymous harbinger. How very fitting for Bleakhurst Manor. Wimsey allowed himself a thin smile. And yet, such a message suggests that someone wishes to manipulate fears, possibly to mask their own intentions. Her gaze flickered briefly. You may be right, Lord Peter. He pressed on gently. Might I ask about this Helena Garrett mentioned in the documents I found? A name, I gather, is unfamiliar to you. Lady Bleakhurst stiffened imperceptibly. Helena Garrett was an unfortunate episode in my husband's past. A woman who we believed had disappeared completely. It was a painful affair long ago. And yet, her name survives in these old wills and letters, hinting at unresolved business. Yes, Lady Bleakhurst admitted. My husband wished to keep that part of his life sealed away, for the sake of the family. Understandable, Wimsey said thoughtfully. Secrets are often the currency of power in these stately homes. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock, and Clive entered with a small tray bearing a cup of tea and a note. Wimsey unfolded the note discreetly. It read, "Meet me in the library at midnight, alone." He looked up. "My lady, it appears someone wishes to speak with me in person, under the cover of darkness." Lady Bleakhurst paled slightly but recovered. Quickly. "Be cautious, Lord Peter. The night holds many shadows, and not all are benign." Wimsey's expression was resolute. "Fear not, my lady. I find the night often more illuminating than the day." After she left, Wimsey reviewed the day's discoveries. The servants' movements, the mysterious message, the old documents, all wove together into a tapestry dense with half-truths and silences. The puzzle was far from solved, but a pattern was emerging. He decided to prepare for the midnight rendezvous by revisiting the library. The room, lined with towering shelves of leather-bound tomes, seemed to whisper of secrets better left undisturbed. He arranged the furniture thoughtfully, placing himself near the fireplace where the light and shadow would provide some advantage. The hours crawled by, the manor settling into a stillness that was almost unnatural. When the clock finally chimed midnight, Wimsey's patience was rewarded by a faint rustle from the door. A figure slipped inside, cloaked and hooded against the chill. The visitor's voice was low but clear. "Lord Peter Wimsey." "Indeed," Wimsey replied, voice calm. "And whom do I have the pleasure of welcoming under such a cloak of mystery?" The figure lowered the hood, revealing a young woman with sharp eyes and an expression of grim determination. "My name is Evelyn Garrett. I am Helena's niece." Wimsey's interest sharpened. "A fascinating development. Pray explain your presence and your message." Evelyn stepped closer. "My aunt disappeared because she uncovered something terrible, something that Bleakhurst Manor's walls have tried to hide for years. I have come to warn you and to seek your help." Wimsey inclined his head. a flicker of admiration in his gaze. "A brave niece indeed. Tell me everything." "Miss Garrett, it seems the past is not only returning but demanding reckoning." She began her tale in a low voice, detailing Helena's discovery of illicit dealings, betrayals that involved the highest levels of the estate's management, and hints that Lord Bleakhurst himself might have been complicit in acts far darker than mere financial mismanagement. As Evelyn spoke, Whimsy took careful mental notes, weaving her testimony into the complex web of facts and half-truths already gathered. Each detail seemed to illuminate another shadowy corner of the manor's history. When she finished, Whimsy was silent for a moment. "Your courage is commendable, Miss Garrett, but we must tread carefully. Those who benefit from silence will not relinquish it easily." "Indeed," she whispered, "which is why I trust you, Lord Peter. You are the only one who can uncover the truth." The encounter concluded with a mutual agreement to proceed with discretion. Evelyn would remain in the manor under the guise of a visitor, while Whimsy would continue his inquiries, now armed with her crucial insights. As she departed, Whimsy reflected on the manifold layers of deception and the psychological intricacies at play. The surface politeness masked a deadly game of control and fear. His thoughts returned to the footman, to the torn apron, and to the mysterious note slipped under the back door. The night was no longer a mere backdrop, but a stage where the final act was slowly being prepared. With a quiet sigh, Whimsy settled by the fire, cigar in hand, the faint curl of smoke weaving like a question mark in the gloom. The past, it seemed, was not only coming back, it was demanding to be heard and answered. The following morning was cloaked in the usual fog that clung stubbornly to the estate, as if nature herself conspired to veil the manor's secrets. Lord Peter Whimsy, having declined the insistence of the household to take breakfast in the grand dining hall, preferred instead the small, sunless conservatory, a choice more than just a matter of taste. The pale, filtered light suited his mood, and the verdant plants, though struggling against the dank air, provided a muted semblance of life amidst the suffocating stillness. He was not left long to his own devices. Clive appeared carrying a carefully folded newspaper, an expression of something between deference and hesitation. "My lord," he said, "you might find this of interest." Whimsy took the paper and scanned the brief column beneath the heading, Local Happenings. There it was, almost buried among notices of village fêtes and parish meetings. An anonymous letter has been received by the county constabulary, alleging that recent troubles at Bleakhurst Manor may be but the surface ripples of a deeper, more troubling scandal. The note was unsigned, as was the telegram received by Lady Bleakhurst. "Curious," Whimsy murmured, folding the paper with deliberate care. "Our mysterious correspondent seems to enjoy his or her anonymity. Yet to whom might they hope to direct such a public insinuation, if not to unsettle those within Bleakhurst itself?" Clive shrugged. "There's been some gossip among the staff. They say the footman, young Mills, was seen arguing heatedly with a stranger near the stables just before the incident. The staff are all quite tight-lipped, of course." Whimsy's eyes narrowed slightly. "The footman, Mills, the same man who has rather a pronounced distaste for shoes, if memory serves. Odd that such a trivial affectation might play a role in a household's dark drama. But we mustn't dismiss small details, they often carry the greatest weight." The mention of Mills brought back a vivid impression. His sullen countenance, the furtive glance when questioned, the subtle limp he acquired after the night of the attack, all fragments of a puzzle not yet complete. Whimsy made a mental note to revisit the stables later, perhaps to engage the footman in further conversation under less formal circumstances. Later that afternoon, Whimsy found himself wandering through the colder wings of the manor, passing behind the great hall where the echo of footsteps was faint but steady. He arrived at the stables, the air thick with the scent of hay and horseflesh. There, Near the shadowed corner stood Mills, polishing a bridle with slow, methodical movements. "Good afternoon, Mills," Whimsy began, his tone deliberately casual. The footman started but said nothing. "Your dislike of footwear is a matter I find intriguing. Might I ask the reason for this particular preference?" Mills glanced up, his eyes wary. "It's nothing, my lord. Just comfort." "Comfort, yes, but of a peculiarly obstinate sort. You were seen barefoot near the West Wing on the night of the incident. Might you explain that?" The young man hesitated, then nodded slowly. I went to check on the horses. Heard a noise. Thought it best not to make a sound." Whimsy considered this. "A sensible precaution. Yet one must also consider the possibility of being seen or heard." Mills bit his lip. "I didn't want to be caught, not by anyone." "Ah, and whom did you fear might catch you?" Mills shifted uneasily. "I don't rightly know. It was just a feeling." Whimsy's gaze softened. "Feelings are often the whispers of deeper truths, Mills. Tell me, do you know of anyone who might wish harm upon Lord Bleakhurst?" The footman's jaw tightened. "There's talk, but no proof. Some think the new steward isn't what he seems." "Indeed. The steward, you say? Tell me more." "Mr. Clements arrived only a few months ago. Quiet, keeps to himself. But some of the staff say he's too curious about things that don't concern him." Whimsy nodded slowly. "Curiosity can be both a virtue and a vice. I shall pay Mr. Clements a visit." Leaving Mills, Whimsy made his way back toward the manor, his mind turning over the new information. The steward, an outsider in this insular world, might be an unwelcome variable in an already delicate equation. Yet it was the matter of the anonymous letters and the appearance of Evelyn Garrett that weighed most heavily. He resolved to speak with the steward before the day ended. Mr. Clements received Whimsy in the manor's study, a dimly lit room filled with heavy oak furniture and the faint odour of old leather and tobacco smoke. The man was slender, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing, though they flickered momentarily with guarded reserve. "Lord Peter," he greeted, voice smooth and polite. "I trust your investigations are proving fruitful, Clements," Whimsy replied. "I have heard whispers that your arrival has unsettled certain established routines here at Bleakhurst." The steward's lips tightened briefly. Change is rarely welcomed by those accustomed to the comfort of tradition. "I assure you, my intentions are merely to serve the estate's best interests." "Admirable, if sincere. Yet I have reason to believe you take a particular interest in matters beyond your official remit." Clements studied Whimsy for a long moment before replying. "I am tasked with overseeing the estate's financial recovery. I have had cause to review old documents, and some discrepancies caught my attention." "Discrepancies?" Whimsy prompted, leaning slightly forward. "Not outright fraud, no, but omissions, ambiguities in the records, especially concerning the late Lord Bleakhurst's dealings with certain business partners." Whimsy felt a flicker of satisfaction. Such omissions often conceal more than simple bookkeeping errors. "Have you spoken of these to Lady Bleakhurst?" "Only in passing," Clements said. "She prefers to preserve the family's dignity, understandably. And yet secrets, as we have learned, have a way of surfacing, sometimes with unpleasant consequences." Clements nodded. "Indeed." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. Clive entered with a message. "My lord, Lady Bleakhurst requests your presence in the drawing room at once. She appears distressed." Whimsy's expression darkened slightly. "I shall attend immediately." As he crossed the manor's cold corridors, his thoughts coalesced into a clearer image. The various strands of evidence, Mills's furtiveness, Clements's suspicions, Evelyn Garrett's revelations, the anonymous letters, were converging toward a truth that no one seemed willing to confront openly. In the drawing room, Lady Bleakhurst awaited, her composure less steady than before. "Lord Peter," she began, "there is something you must see." She handed him a small folded sheet of paper, yellowed with age. It was a letter, penned in a cramped hand. The text was a confession, dated nearly a decade earlier, implicating a former steward in a scheme of embezzlement and betrayal. "But this changes everything," Lady Bleakhurst whispered. "If this letter were known, it would ruin us all." "Yet it explains much," Wimsey observed quietly. "The fear, the secrecy, the desperate measures. It would also suggest someone has gone to great lengths to suppress this document." Lady Bleakhurst nodded. "Exactly, and if I may be frank, I suspect that the same person may have been involved in the recent violence." Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "Then we have a new line of inquiry, one that involves uncovering not just who acted, but who benefited most from the concealment of the past." Her eyes met his with a mixture of hope and dread. Outside, the persistent fog thickened, as if to shield the manor's dark heart from prying eyes. But inside, the game was afoot, and Lord Peter Wimsey was more determined than ever to expose the shadows lurking beneath the surface. The footman's hatred of shoes, the anonymous warnings, the hidden letters, all were pieces in a puzzle growing ever more intricate. And Wimsey, with his blend of arch-wit and precise logic, would unravel it thread by thread until the final uncomfortable truth was laid bare. Wimsey spent the rest of the afternoon navigating the shadows of Bleakhurst Manor's labyrinthine corridors, his mind occupied with the newly unearthed letter and its implications. The confession, though dated, cast a long and sinister shadow over the present, suggesting that the violence had not been a random act of desperation, but a calculated attempt to bury a family skeleton. The house itself seemed to respond to this revelation. The stiff portraits of stern ancestors glared down with renewed disapproval, and the long echoes in the corridors felt less like the murmurs of history and more like the whispers of a secret too dangerous to admit aloud. His first priority was to understand the provenance of the letter. Lady Bleakhurst's reluctance to reveal its existence to others was understandable, but that secrecy could well have made the document a target. Who else knew of it? Who stood to gain by suppressing it? Questions swirled, unanswered. Wimsey began by revisiting the servants, starting with Clive, the butler, whose measured demeanour masked an acute awareness of household undercurrents. "Clive," Wimsey said quietly, "this letter. Who besides yourself and Lady Bleakhurst might be aware of its existence?" The butler considered before replying. "Only a few, my lord. The late Lord Bleakhurst's solicitor was entrusted with a copy. And of course the steward, Mr. Clements, has had access to the household papers, though I cannot say if he has seen this particular letter." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "The solicitor might be worth a visit, then. Meanwhile, I shall ask you to keep this confidential. It appears the house itself is holding its breath." As he departed, Wimsey's mind circled back to the letter's contents. A web of deceit involving embezzlement, betrayal, and a disgraced steward who vanished shortly thereafter. Circumstances that, if known, would have shattered the family's reputation. The possibility that the current steward might be linked to this sordid past grew increasingly plausible. Yet Clemence's polite evasions in their earlier conversation hinted at something deeper, perhaps fear or guilt. Wimsey's next visit was to the solicitor's office, a modest but respectable establishment in the nearby market town. There, an elderly man with sharp eyes and a brisk manner received him. "I understand you wish to discuss a document related to the Bleakhurst estate," the solicitor asked. Wimsey nodded, producing a copy of the letter, carefully avoiding revealing that it had been given to him. The solicitor's expression darkened. "That letter was delivered to me years ago, yes. It was supposed to remain confidential, part of a settlement to avoid scandal. The man who wrote it disappeared soon after." Do you know what became of him? The solicitor hesitated. Rumour had it he fled the country, but no one ever confirmed. The family preferred to believe the matter closed. Yet the letter's recent reappearance suggests otherwise. Yes, and I have received a few curious inquiries of late. Anonymous letters, if you will, warning that old sins do not stay buried. Wimsey's interest piqued. And these correspondences, do you suspect their origin? I have my suspicions. It is unsettling how well someone inside the household seems informed. Returning to the manor, Wimsey found the atmosphere palpably tenser. The staff moved with nervous glances, and servants whispered behind closed doors. The footman Mills remained an enigma, his barefoot defiance both literal and metaphorical, a symbol, perhaps, of resistance to the unspoken rules governing Bleakhurst. In the drawing-room, Lady Bleakhurst awaited, her countenance pale but resolute. "My lord," she said, "since last evening strange noises have been heard in the west wing. Doors creak, footsteps echo where none should be. The household is on edge." Wimsey allowed himself a faint smile. "The manor protests, madam, as do all old houses when secrets are disturbed. Do you believe someone is trying to unsettle us further, or to uncover what should remain hidden?" He suggested a discreet nocturnal inspection, a subtle reconnaissance to observe without alerting potential conspirators. That night, cloaked in the dark, Wimsey moved through the shadowed halls, the silence broken only by his soft footsteps and the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. The west wing, with its draughty windows and faded tapestries, seemed to exhale a cold breath. Pausing near the door to the servants' quarters, he caught a faint rustle, the whisper of fabric against wood. A figure slipped into the gloom. Mills, unmistakably, but this time shod in worn leather shoes. "Ah, Mills," Wimsey greeted, stepping forward. "I see you have reconsidered your footwear preferences." The footman started, but did not flee. Instead, he looked at Wimsey with a mixture of defiance and desperation. "I had to," Mills said softly. "I thought it best to move more quietly." Quiet. Movement is an art. And what, pray tell, are you doing prowling these halls at such an hour? Mills's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm trying to find out who's been sneaking around, who's behind the threats. I'm not as useless as I seem." "Good," Wimsey replied, "because the game is more dangerous than it appears." Mills's eyes gleamed with a fragile hope. "Can you help me? I don't want more blood spilled." Before Wimsey could answer, a sharp sound rang through the corridor. A door clicking shut somewhere deeper in the manor. Both men froze, listening. The faintest echo of footsteps receded down the hall. Wimsey's brows knit. "Someone else moves tonight, and not as silently as you." Returning to the drawing-room, he found Lady Bleakhurst awaiting news. The night's shadows had deepened, but so had the mystery. The manor was alive with secrets, and each seemed to breathe with menace. Wimsey's thoughts turned to Evelyn Garrett, the enigmatic woman whose arrival had unsettled the household days before. Her presence was no mere coincidence, he was certain. Something in her manner hinted at knowledge, perhaps even complicity, yet her true intentions remained elusive. He resolved to speak with her once more, hoping that her penchant for the dramatic might reveal a crack in the carefully constructed facade. The following morning, Wimsey found Evelyn in the library, perched by the tall windows and watching the mist swirl across the grounds. "Miss Garrett," he said smoothly, "you seem to have arrived at a most inconvenient time." She smiled, a touch wistfully. "One might say I have a knack for trouble, Lord Peter, but what is it you seek?" "Truth, above all, though it often hides behind layers of deception." She turned, meeting his gaze steadily. "Then you must look beyond the obvious. The letter, the threats, the whispered warnings, they are all symptoms of something deeper, older than any of us." "Older?" Whimsy prompted. The sins of Bleakhurst reach far back, far beyond the disgraced steward. There are shadows in this house that no document can expose. Whimsy's interest sharpened. Are you suggesting that the past still wields power here, more than mere gossip or scandal? Precisely. And that those who fear exposure might go to great lengths to protect their secrets. Her words hung in the air, charged with an eerie resonance. Yet Whimsy's mind sought the tangible, the evidence that could be weighed, questioned, and tested. Then we must proceed carefully, he said. For the truth you hint at could unsettle not only Bleakhurst, but all who dwell within. Evelyn's eyes gleamed with an almost spectral light. I have no doubt of that, Lord Peter. As the day wore on, the threads of intrigue wove tighter. The anonymous letters, the resurfaced confession, the nocturnal movements, the spectral warnings, all pointed toward a revelation that would shatter the delicate veneer of Bleakhurst Manor. Yet Whimsy, ever the patient hunter, knew the final pieces remained hidden, waiting for the moment when the full picture would emerge, illuminated by the cold, unyielding light of logic. For beneath the Gothic shadows and whispered threats lay a very human truth, tangled with jealousy, betrayal, and the desperate need to control one's own fate. And Lord Peter Whimsy, with his arch wit and razor-sharp intellect, was determined to uncover it. The manor seemed to throb with a tension that was almost palpable, as though every stone and timber held its breath in anticipation. Lord Peter Whimsy moved deliberately. Through the dim corridors of Bleakhurst, the waning afternoon light filtering through stained glass to cast distorted shapes upon the walls. It was the kind of place where shadows took on a life of their own, an environment that suited the slow unraveling of secrets with which he was now deeply engaged. Whimsy's mind was occupied chiefly with Evelyn Garrett's cryptic remarks. Her suggestion that the sins of Bleakhurst reached far beyond the disgraced steward's confession was a tantalizing piece of the puzzle, yet it was the solidity of evidence that mattered. Gothic hints, whispered legends, and veiled threats were but atmospheric flourishes, until pinned down by concrete fact. Returning to the library, Whimsy examined once again the contents of the old ledger Lady Bleakhurst had reluctantly produced, a record of household expenses, odd payments, and unexplained deductions that seemed, on the surface, mundane. But in this house, as Whimsy had learned, the mundane was often a mask. A particular entry caught his eye, a series of payments to a Mr. Blackwell over a period ending just months before the steward's disappearance. The name was unfamiliar, not among the usual tradespeople or staff. Curiosity piqued, Whimsy cross-referenced the manor's visitor's book. A Mr. Blackwell appeared twice, both visits marked with the cryptic annotation, "Business concluded." Intriguing, but it was a fragment, a piece needing its place in the larger mosaic. The household atmosphere was palpably frayed. The servants, once the stiff-lipped bastion of discretion, now seemed to carry a collective anxiety. Whimsy had noticed fleeting glances exchanged in corners, hurried, hushed conversations stilled when he approached. Even Clive, the ever-composed butler, displayed an edge of unease when they met in the corridor. "Have you noticed anything new, Clive?" Whimsy inquired quietly as they crossed paths near the servants' stairwell. The butler's lips compressed, but he inclined his head. "Sir, there have been reports of missing items. Small things at first, trinkets, an old silver salver from the sideboard, a decorative vase. Nothing of great value, but odd for the household. Petty theft or something more? Difficult to say, but the fact these are disappearing despite the household being under constant watch suggests an insider, someone who knows the house intimately." Whimsy nodded, stroking his chin. Familiarity breeds confidence, and sometimes recklessness, or desperation. Clive hesitated before continuing. "There's also talk among the staff of strange noises, footsteps where none should be, doors opening and closing, especially near the west wing." Whimsy's thoughts drifted back to the previous night's encounter with Mills. The footman's sudden switch from bare feet to worn shoes was no mere affectation. It was a sign of caution, a shield against discovery. "Thank you, Clive. I shall keep this in mind." That evening, Whimsy took to his habitual cigar, the smoky tendrils curling upwards, like the thoughts he could not yet disentangle. He sat by the fire in the drawing-room, joined unexpectedly by Miss Garrett. "I hope—" "I'm not intruding," she said, voice soft but steady. "Not at all," Whimsy replied, offering a faint smile. "Your presence here is more stimulating than the fire." Evelyn's eyes glittered with a mixture of amusement and something deeper, perhaps a shade of guilt or sorrow. "I have been thinking," she said, "about the payments to Mr. Blackwell. You mentioned there is a story behind that name, one I had hoped would remain buried." Whimsy gestured for her to continue. "Mr. Blackwell was the alias of a man connected to the Bleakhurst estate long before the current family took residence. A man who acted as intermediary in dealings that were, shall we say, less than entirely legitimate. Smuggling, forgery, embezzlement? None so dramatic as smuggling. But there was an element of financial manipulation, land disputes, forged deeds, and at least one scandal that involved a local magistrate. And this man vanished? Officially, yes, but the payments recorded in the ledger suggest a connection that persisted, perhaps through silence bought or threats made." Whimsy folded his hands. "The past, it seems, casts a long and restless shadow over Bleakhurst." "Indeed, and someone is determined to keep that shadow alive." His mind raced, assembling the fragments, the anonymous letters warning of old, sins, the secret payments, the mysterious Mr. Blackwell, and now the petty thefts coupled with nocturnal disturbances. The atmosphere was thick with a threat that was both psychological and practical. "Miss Garrett," Whimsy said thoughtfully, "there is something you are not telling me. I detect a reluctance bordering on fear. Would it be too bold to ask why you are here and what you truly hope to find?" She looked away momentarily, then back, resolute. "Because I know what Bleakhurst can do to those who cross it. I came seeking justice, or at least understanding." Whimsy inclined his head. "And justice is precisely what I intend to deliver. But to do so, we must uncover the full story, no matter how unsavory." The next day brought with it a faint drizzle that seemed to mirror the somber mood. Whimsy arranged to speak once more with the household, focusing particularly on the servants, whose loyalties and knowledge could prove pivotal. In the servants' hall, the gathered staff exchanged uneasy glances as Whimsy posed his questions. It was clear that fear had taken root, fear not only of the crime itself, but of the shadows it cast over each of them. A young maid named Elsie, timid but observant, offered a detail previously overlooked. The night before Lord Bleakhurst's death, I saw the steward, Mr. Clements, near the West Wing Library. He looked disturbed, and he was carrying something wrapped in cloth. Whimsy's ears pricked. "Did you see where he went?" "No, sir." But he hurried toward the servants, stairs and then out of sight, a small but telling detail. The West Wing Library, the very room where the letter had presumably been stored, was becoming a focal point of suspicion. Whimsy sought out Clements later that afternoon. The steward's composure was brittle, a veneer thinly masking tension. "Mr. Clements," Whimsy began gently, "your movements near the West Wing Library have been noted. Care to explain?" Clements's gaze flickered. I was retrieving some documents Lady Bleakhurst requested. Nothing more. Documents that may include a letter confessing to past misdeeds." Clements swallowed. "That letter was a private matter. It should have stayed so." Whimsy's tone hardened, though still measured. "Indeed. But secrecy in a house like Bleakhurst is a dangerous thing. It breeds suspicion, and sometimes worse." The steward hesitated, then in a rare moment of candor revealed, There is more to the story. Mr. Blackwell was not merely a name on paper. He was my brother, and when he disappeared, so did any hope of peace for me. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. Your brother? That complicates matters. Were you trying to protect his memory or conceal his crimes? Clemence looked away. Both, perhaps. But I swear I had no hand in the violence that befell Lord Bleakhurst. Nor in the thefts? Whimsy pressed. The steward's shoulders slumped. I cannot say who did, but the house holds many shadows, some darker than you imagine. As the light faded outside, Whimsy was left with a complicated tableau, a family haunted by history, a staff ensnared in webs of loyalty and fear, and a mystery whose solution required peeling back not only lies, but layers of human frailty. The next phase of his investigation would demand patience, cunning, and above all, an unerring eye for detail. For within the manor's walls the truth lay obscured, waiting to be drawn out from the darkness by the gentle but relentless light of reason. The chill of early evening seeped through the heavy curtains of Bleakhurst Manor, casting long, wavering shadows across the room where Whimsy sat, absently tracing the rim of his glass. The day's revelations had piled upon one another like the crumbling leaves outside, each new detail both illuminating and deepening the tangled mystery that clung stubbornly to the estate's ancient stones. Clemence's confession that the elusive Mr. Blackwell was his brother had shifted the landscape considerably. It explained the hush that had descended over the steward but raised fresh questions. What exactly had Blackwell been involved in? Why had his disappearance left a wound festering decades later? And how deep did Clemence's own involvement run? Whimsy's gaze drifted to the faint outline of the west wing, visible through the window. That part of the house, long neglected and whispered about, had become the pivot around which the investigation now turned. The letter's hidden origin, the nocturnal disturbances, even the petty thefts seemed to orbit that decaying heart of Bleakhurst. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Lady Bleakhurst entered quietly, her face pale but composed. "My lord," she began, "there is something you should know. The maid, Elsie, found this in the West Wing corridor just after you spoke with Clemence." She handed Whimsy a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Unfolding it carefully, he revealed a folded scrap of parchment, aged, brittle, and bearing a hastily scrawled note. "The letter," Whimsy murmured, reading aloud. "They think the past is buried, but the roots run deep. Beware the shadows where light does not reach." The message was ominous, a warning steeped in menace. Lady Bleakhurst's voice was barely above a whisper. "Who could have left this here? And why?" Whimsy considered. "Someone wants us to know the past is not at rest. It may be a threat or a plea for caution." "Do you believe this relates to the recent thefts?" she asked. "Likely. These acts seem less about material gain and more about intimidation. The house is speaking, but through silences and threats rather than words." As they spoke, a sudden knock came from the hall, more urgent this time. Clive, the butler, appeared, face drawn. "My lord, there's been an incident. Mr. Mills was found unconscious near the gardener's shed. It seems he was attacked." The news cut through the quiet tension like a blade. Whimsy rose swiftly, motioning Lady Bleakhurst to remain seated. "Take me to him at once." Outside, the cold air bit sharply as Whimsy followed Clive across the sprawling grounds. The gardener's shed stood at the edge of the estate's wild perimeter, partially obscured by gnarled branches and creeping ivy. Mills lay on the ground, pale and bruised, eyes fluttering as a nurse attended to him. His usually defiant posture was broken, vulnerable. "Can you tell us what happened?" Whimsy asked gently. Mills struggled to speak, voice hoarse. I saw someone." a shadow moving near the west wing last night. I tried to follow, but they caught me, hit me from behind. Did you see who? Whimsy pressed. No, masked. But they carried something like a letter or a document. They were taking it, I think. The pieces clicked into place with chilling clarity. Someone was trying to steal evidence, proof of long-buried crimes, and willing to attack to keep it hidden. Whimsy's mind raced. We need to search the west wing immediately. That part of the house is the epicenter of these disturbances. The return to the manor was swift but heavy with foreboding. Whimsy led a small party, Clive, Mills, and 2 other trusted staff, toward the neglected corridor leading to the west wing. The air grew colder, the light dimmer as they crossed the threshold into the shadowed section of the manor. Every step seemed to echo ominously, the walls pressing in with the weight of untold stories. Whimsy examined the floor closely, scratches, faint footprints, signs of recent passage where none should have been. In a small alcove beneath a crumbling window, they found the torn remnants of paper, bits of the letter Mills had described, ripped and scattered as if hastily discarded. Someone's desperate to destroy this evidence, Whimsy said grimly, and to prevent the truth from coming to light. They continued deeper, reaching a locked door that led to the west wing library. Whimsy produced a key obtained earlier from the steward's desk and turned it with a click. Inside, the room was coated in dust and shadows. Shelves sagged under the weight of neglected tomes and yellowed documents. Whimsy scanned the room carefully, eyes settling on a faint disturbance in the dust near the fireplace, footprints, half smudged. Suddenly, a soft creak from above startled the group. Looking up, Whimsy spotted a loose floorboard near the ceiling, just large enough to hide a small compartment. With Clive's help, Whimsy dislodged the board, revealing a shallow hollow containing a small leather-bound journal. He opened it carefully. The entries were penned in a hurried, shaky hand, the ink faded but legible. The journal belonged to Mr. Blackwell. The first page was a confession, details of financial manipulation, forged documents, threats issued to local officials, and a coded reference to a secret buried beneath the hearth, an insinuation that something physical, perhaps evidence, was concealed within the manor itself. Whimsy's pulse quickened. This was the key, an explicit clue that the tangled history of Bleakhurst was not merely written in letters and ledgers but hidden in plain sight. He turned to Lady Bleakhurst, who had joined them quietly. We must find this secret beneath the hearth. It is the last thread linking the past to the present. As the group spread out, searching the hearth and its surroundings, Mills suddenly called out, "Here, beneath these stones." With effort, they moved loose bricks at the base of the fireplace, revealing a narrow cavity containing a small, rusted metal box. Whimsy opened it slowly. Inside lay a bundle of papers, old deeds, receipts, letters, and, most intriguingly, a folded map marked with cryptic symbols. The documents detailed land transactions and secret agreements implicating several prominent families in a conspiracy to suppress claims on valuable property, including the Bleakhurst estate itself. The implications were staggering. The current occupants were the beneficiaries of decades of deceit, a truth that would shatter reputations and potentially destabilize the fragile social order. Whimsy's mind reeled. The anonymous threats, the attacks, the thefts, they all now made sense. Someone desperate to prevent exposure, willing to manipulate, intimidate, even resort to violence. But who? His gaze turned to Clements, the steward, whose connection to Blackwell had already cast suspicion, and to Evelyn Garrett, whose arrival and insight suggested a personal stake. Before he could voice his thoughts, a sudden noise came from the hallway, a sharp, hurried footfall, retreating into the gloom. Whimsy moved swiftly, but the corridor was empty. Only the echo of footsteps remained. The game was far from over, and Lord Peter Wimsey knew the next move would be the most dangerous yet. The manor, once a place of brittle civility and whispered secrets, had now become a theatre of shadows and half-truths. As the clock in the hall told the late hour, Lord Peter Wimsey stood before the assembled household and their most persistent observers, the local constabulary, his expression a blend of mild amusement and steely purpose. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice low but commanding, "we find ourselves in the rather awkward position of unmasking not a phantom, but a flesh-and-blood architect of deceit and violence." He paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. The mystery of Bleakhurst is not merely about stolen papers or a missing man. It is a tale of family pride, of long-buried resentments, and of a desperate attempt to rewrite history in one's favour. Yet, as with all such endeavours, the truth has a way of clawing its way into the light. Eyes flicked nervously between Wimsey and the principal figures of the household. Among them, Clemence's stoic mask began to falter. Evelyn Garrett's composure tightened, and Lady Bleakhurst remained poised but visibly unsettled. Let us first consider the evidence recovered from the West Wing, the journal of the late T.C. Mr. Blackwell. It clearly implicates a conspiracy involving fraudulent land deeds and the manipulation of local governance. A serious matter, certainly, but not one that in itself explains the recent violence. Wimsey turned to Clemence. "You, sir, have been somewhat less than candid about your knowledge of your brother's affairs. It was you who sent the threatening notes, was it not? And you who orchestrated the thefts and the attack on Mr. Mills to keep this dark secret from surfacing?" Clemence's jaw tightened. "I did what I must to protect the family name." "Understandable," Wimsey conceded dryly. "But unfortunately, a family name that rests upon deceit is a fragile thing indeed." "But there is more," Wimsey continued, stepping forward. "Our true culprit is not the embattled steward, but one who moved with the grace of a friend and the guile of a serpent." He looked directly at Evelyn Garrett. "Miss Garrett, your arrival here under the guise of mere curiosity was anything but accidental. Your knowledge of the estate's history, your swift acquaintance with the staff, and your insistence on certain irrelevant details all pointed to a more personal motive." Evelyn's eyes flashed briefly, then cooled. "What do you mean?" Wimsey smiled thinly. "You are in fact the granddaughter of Mr. Blackwell himself. You sought to reclaim what you believed was stolen from your family, right the wrongs of the past. But when your efforts met resistance, you resorted to intimidation and violence. The threats, the thefts, and the attempt on Mills, all calculated to conceal your pursuit of justice as you saw it." The room was silent, the accusation hanging like a guillotine's blade. Evelyn's facade cracked. "I only wanted what was mine. The land, the papers, my birthright." "And yet," Wimsey said softly, "justice demands more than passion. It requires restraint and honesty. The law and morality do not bend for personal grievance." With that, Evelyn's defiance crumbled. She confessed fully the staged break-ins, the manipulation of evidence, the carefully timed threats. Her vendetta had been both her strength and her downfall. As the constables took her into custody, Lady Bleakhurst sighed, relief and sorrow mingling in her eyes. Wimsey turned to her with a wry smile. "A most theatrical finale, Lady Bleakhurst. Shakespeare would have been proud, though I dare say he might have penned a slightly less sanguine ending." She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Lord Peter, for uncovering not only the truth, but the human heart behind it." Wimsey lit a cigar with his customary flourish, the smoke curling like the final flourish of a well-executed symphony. "All in a day's work, madam. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a train to catch and a mystery elsewhere to unravel. But I do hope Bleakhurst finds a gentler peace henceforth." As he departed into the night, the manor's shadows seemed to retreat, just a little, yielding to the steadfast light of reason and the quiet, unyielding intellect of Lord Peter Wimsey.